What would you do if your government, your own military, secretly drafted a plan to kill innocent Americans just to start a war? Not a rogue nation, not a dictator in exile, but the United States of America. In 1962, at the height of the Cold War. This wasn't a movie plot, it wasn't fiction. It was called Operation Northwoods, a top-secret blueprint signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to use fake terror to justify an invasion of Cuba. They planned to bomb U.S., sink boats of refugees, hijack American aircraft, stage funeral processions, even plant fake evidence to blame Cuba. Why? Because they needed a reason to go to war. And the American people weren't providing one. The documents were real. The signatures were real. And if not for one man, President John F. Kennedy, this operation might have unfolded as planned. This is the true declassified story of Operation Northwoods, the plan to kill Americans for political gain. The Cold War wasn't just a standoff, it was an obsession. For nearly half a century, the US and the Soviet Union engaged in a global chess match, building arsenals, toppling governments, and playing puppet master across continents. But in the early 1960s, one place became the most dangerous square on that chessboard: Cuba. Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, Cuba had undergone a revolution. Fidel Castro overthrew the American-backed Batista regime and soon after aligned himself with the Soviet Union. For Washington, this was more than a threat, it was an insult. A communist regime right next door. In 1961, the U.S. tried to remove Castro with the Bay of Pigs invasion, a failed CIA operation that ended in disaster. The defeat humiliated the Kennedy administration and deepened mistrust between military leaders and the White House. And so, behind closed doors, U.S. military leaders decided they needed a better plan. Something bold, something undeniable, something that would force America to support a full-scale war with Cuba. In March of 1962, General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, signed off on a document titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. Inside was the most chilling series of proposals ever written by a modern democracy. The logic was simple. If the American people wouldn't support a war with Cuba naturally, then the government would have to create an event so shocking, so brutal, that no one would question retaliation. The document laid out dozens of staged events, some absurd, some terrifying. Here are just a few of the actual proposals written in Operation Northwoods. Blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame it on Cuba. Stage a terrorist bombing campaign in U.S. cities, including Miami and Washington, D.C. Hijack American civilian airliners and blame it on Cuban-backed terrorists. Attack Cuban exiles, refugees, and immigrants, then claim it was Castro's regime. Create a Remember the Maine type incident to galvanize public anger. This wasn't rogue fantasy, this was formal military strategy. And it wasn't just proposed. It was approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most senior military officers in the United States. The proposals in Operation Northwoods weren't vague. They were meticulously detailed, designed with the precision of a real operation. Here's one example. We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents, and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement would be helpful. Another, we could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. We could foster attempts on the lives of Cuban refugees. We could make it appear that it was backed by the Cuban government. And perhaps most horrifying, we could fabricate an incident where an American aircraft is hijacked and replaced by a drone. The drone would be destroyed over Cuban airspace using a fake passenger list and staged funerals to generate public outrage. These weren't just hypotheticals. They were action items, bullet points, steps for execution, and all of it was aimed at manipulating the American public. When Operation Northwoods reached the desk of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and President John F. Kennedy, it was immediately rejected. Kennedy was furious. He already mistrusted the military leadership after the Bay of Pigs failure. Operation Northwoods confirmed his worst fears, that the Pentagon was willing to lie, kill, and stage atrocities to manipulate the American public into war. Shortly afterward, Kennedy removed General Lemnitzer from his position as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But the damage was done. The plan had been written, approved, signed, "If Kennedy had agreed, history might have looked very different." It's worth remembering this was just 1 year before the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world teetered on the edge of nuclear war. And in 1963, Kennedy was assassinated. For decades, Operation Northwoods remained buried. It wasn't until 1997, through the Assassination Records Review Board, created in the wake of Oliver Stone's JFK film, that the documents were declassified. Researchers, journalists, and historians were stunned. There it was, in black and white. Government documents proposing attacks on American civilians, signed by military leaders, hidden for 35 years. Some dismissed it as a historical footnote. Others saw it as proof of something far darker, that false flag operations weren't just conspiracy theory, they were real government policy. And if it was proposed once, who's to say it hasn't been used again? Operation Northwoods wasn't the first false flag operation, and it wouldn't be the last. Let's look at a few key examples from history. 1. The Reichstag fire, 1933. Germany's parliament building burned. Hitler blamed communists. It was the justification he used to suspend civil liberties and consolidate power. 2. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, 1964 U.S. Ships claimed they were attacked by North Vietnamese forces. Decades later, it was revealed that the second attack never happened, but the incident was used to escalate the Vietnam War. Number 3. The Naira testimony, 1990. A young Kuwaiti girl testified before Congress that Iraqi soldiers removed babies from incubators. Her story, used to justify the Gulf War, was later revealed to be orchestrated by a public relations firm on behalf of the Kuwaiti government. The pattern is clear. Real wars often begin with manufactured outrage. Let's pause and ask a terrifying question. What if Kennedy had approved Operation Northwoods? What would history look like? Imagine bombings in Miami, attacks on civilians blamed on Cubans, a war launched on a lie, thousands killed, millions misled. Would the truth have ever come out? Would anyone believe it? Would we live in a nation where terrorism was just another policy tool? And perhaps, are we already living in that world? The legacy of Operation Northwoods is not confined to the Cold War. Today, trust in institutions is at historic lows. Government lies, media manipulation, and public skepticism have become default settings. In this environment, Operation Northwoods is more than a historical curiosity. It's a warning sign, a blueprint, a reminder that democracy only works when citizens know the truth, and that power, unchecked, can justify anything, even terror, even murder, even sacrificing the people it claims to protect. What makes Operation Northwoods so disturbing isn't just the content. It's the ease with which it was proposed, the confidence in deception, the belief that people can and should be manipulated for strategic goals. It's a story of power unrestrained, of patriotism twisted into propaganda, of public trust used as a weapon. And it's not over, because if a government once considered killing its own citizens for political gain, what else might it consider today? The truth is not always convenient. It doesn't come with permission, and often it arrives decades too late. But truth matters. History matters. And remembering Operation Northwoods is not about paranoia. It's about protection. Protection of freedom, of transparency, of the fundamental idea that the government serves the people, not the other way around. They planned it, they wrote it, they signed it, and only one man stopped it. Operation Northwoods was real, and it could have changed everything. You've just seen the story they tried to bury, the story that almost killed Americans to spark a war. This was Operation Northwoods, the plan to kill Americans for war. If this opened your eyes, don't let it disappear again. Like, share, subscribe, and remember, when the truth threatens power, power tries to erase it. This is Curell Case Files.